Related more. That's all. My coffee maker gave up the ghost, and my I had to go looking in my camping gear to find my pour over so I could make myself a cup of coffee, and my finger hurts.
Oh,
I smashed it in the back of the car.
oh,
Hey,
So that's all.
we pray for the healing of your thumb.
Me. That's all there is. I want to say something that I discovered that is so much fun. I am preaching on Sunday, and y'all know that the lectionary reading for Sunday, and I'm preaching the lectionary. I'm at St. Martha and Mary in Egan here, and so it's the last Sunday after the Epiphany. Therefore, it's the Transfiguration readings, and so I'm reading Luke. What are we at? Luke, what's the transfiguration? Luke 9. In the and I'm listening to the working preacher people from here at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. And they pointed out to me that in the NRSVUE, they call it the UE,
it
that in
stands for updated
the
edition.
updated edition.
No.
Come on, somebody tell me where the darn transfiguration is here. It's right here. The narrow door that crossed them too far. Anyway, so one of the things that Jesus says to Peter, James, and John is that he is turning his face toward Jerusalem, right? Find that. That he's turning his face toward the Transfiguration. Luke, I had it sitting on my desktop the whole time. Luke 9, we're in verse 28 and following, and verse 31 says, they appeared in glory, so that's Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, and we're speaking, and the translation has been, he set his focus, his sights on Jerusalem. They in the regular translation, they appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Okay, so that's what we've always heard in some sort of way. The UE says they appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem.
Wow.
Isn't that, I mean, so I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, we've always known that he's got to return, he's got to go to Jerusalem, and that the news in Jerusalem will never be good. That we know he will die in Jerusalem. I think he knows he'll die in Jerusalem. I don't think his followers know he'll die in Jerusalem. What they're saying is that the earliest, so the translation is, it has that in it, that he will make his exodus. And that, so I'm thinking about these two things, our study of the book of Exodus, and then the use of that in Luke to talk about Jesus's movement to Jerusalem. And I just find it fascinating.
Which ties in with the concept of the Exodus being freed from slavery, which ties in with Jesus's freeing us all from slavery.
Exactly.
Plus, you can kind of go the slavery that he was stuck on earth for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, so in the context of transfiguration, and exactly what you said, Anne, that Jesus's role on this earth is to free people from slavery. So Exodus is exactly the right word in that particular context. So it invokes all of that liberation, freedom, and everything that there is to know about what the Exodus is all about. Just
So
that.
to that end, after I have read the lessons that the parts of the Bible that ends gives for each chapter
Mhm.
in that book that you and I both have, Anne, which is NRSV. I've been reading the same chapters from the Jewish Publication Society.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I mean, they're very, very similar, but what's different about them is sort of fascinating. You know, they never once say that Pharaoh hardened his heart. They say that he was stubborn, or I can't remember the other thing, but and the insects. No, which one was it? One of the gnats are lice, and the flies just say insects.
And the flies do what?
They're insects in the Jewish Publication Society translation.
And am I correct that in each situation, the Hebrew slaves were not affected by the
Right.
What am I trying to say? Pestilence and
by the plagues.
Yeah.
No, and both translations make that clear. I just thought it was interesting how, you know, a tiny little change in wording makes you think about something completely different.
So how does that land on us? That difference in word, the difference from Pharaoh's heart was hardened, or God hardened Pharaoh's heart, to Pharaoh being stubborn.
Yeah.
Oh, those are totally different.
It is.
And we talked about this last week, saying that we were struggling with questions of agency and whose fault it was that Pharaoh was such a jackass.
Yeah.
Was it God's fault? Yeah, we talked about God hardened his. It says God hardened his heart, and we're going.
Right, and here the JPS said, but the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, which is very similar. But the ones where they say he was stubborn is totally different to me.
So that's total Pharaoh agency. I mean,
yeah.
At least that's the difference in the world and in the word as I hear it. That if Pharaoh was stubborn, that's completely his agency. I mean, I still don't understand the God as agent in that at all. I still don't.
That's what
I don't know if I'll ever quite understand that one.
The translation that God hardened.
Yes.
That he would have to take the firstborn of the children. Of course, that makes me kind of go.
So I don't know how many different every translation I've come across, no matter what the word is, it has always, though that has been consistent. The God being the agent in hardening Pharaoh's heart on those occasions. Whether it's God hardened Pharaoh's heart or God stiffened, it's still God as agent rather than Pharaoh as agent, and that seems consistent, and that's the part I don't understand at all. I just don't get that. So Jane, was it you gonna say something, Jane Korsberg?
Yeah, this is from the 5 books of Moses, Robert Alter. This is the note on the phrase shall harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and portents. Whatever the theological difficulties, the general aim of God's allowing or here causing Pharaoh to persist in his harshness is made clear. Without Pharaoh's resistance, God would not have the opportunity to deploy his great wonders and so demonstrate his insuperable power in history and the emptiness of the power attributed to the gods of Egypt. It should be noted that 3 different verbs are used in the story for the action on or in Pharaoh's heart. And then it gives it in Hebrew, which means to harden, and that's a verb, to toughen, or in the context, to strengthen. Literally to be heavy, which in English unfortunately suggests sorrow when linked with the heart, and so has been rendered harden. In this translation, the force of all 3 idioms is to be stubborn, unfeeling, arrogantly inflexible, and there doesn't seem to be much differentiation of meaning among the terms, though elsewhere, hizek, linked with heart, has a positive meaning, to show firm resolve.
Does it say that that's what God was doing, was showing firm resolve? It doesn't say that, does it?
It doesn't say that, but it suggests that God is showing Pharaoh that there is one God.
Yeah, and it begins to make a little more sense to me in the pantheon of gods. If God is needing to say to, I mean, God doesn't say to the other gods, right? But God is making a statement about being the God, and doing so by having Pharaoh sort of be the bad guy, be the agent, so that he can come out looking good.
So that Pharaoh is diminished with every time he opens his mouth and nope, not going to do it.
Yeah.
He doesn't get more powerful. He becomes less powerful.
And I don't know that I like any of that, but that begins to make just a little bit more sense.
Well,
You know, what we talked about last week was that God creates chaos
Yeah.
in order to bring order.
Yes.
That's right.
So these plagues are another way of creating chaos. In fact, he says on page 71, like the flood, each plague is a little pocket of chaos. The created order goes berserk for a time before order is restored. And then further down, the stories of the creation, the flood, the plagues, and the Red Sea are meant to be read in light of each other, to interpret each other.
The part you didn't read from the paragraph, like the flood, crucially, God's people are protected from the chaos and the bad guys aren't. But to me, there's a big but there. I mean, clearly, I think we can attribute to Pharaoh the bad guy appellation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But surely there were Egyptians that had nothing to do with it, nothing to do with enslaving the Israelites.
There's still
nothing to do with
collateral to it.
this.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
collateral damage.
They never voted for Pharaoh. They could put that bumper sticker on their car.
Yeah.
So Avis, you were going to jump in. I do still have a thought to add to all of that.
Yeah, well, I would guess my thought is that, because I have been turning over the question of agency and God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Maybe Pharaoh is an unimportant character. I was just thinking about the wizard in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
The Pharaoh is not like the wizard. Pharaoh is more like those goofy doorkeepers that keep people away from the wizard.
Yeah.
And And, you have to, whatever, you just have to get past them, because the real conflict is between Yahweh and the other deities. Enns was
Right.
making that really clear in this chapter.
Mhm.
So
That's
it's
true.
kind of funny because, Pharaoh's the rich and famous guy. But honestly, the rich and famous guy hardly counts for peanuts. God's beef is with the deities. Yahweh's beef is with the deities.
That's an interesting thought in there.
It
because
is. That really,
You don't get it in the reading of that part, but you're right, because that's what Enns brings out, Avis, that you're right about that he, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that too, the idea that, that they allowed, that the concept of other deities was very real in this point of time
right.
chapter, and it was like, okay. That it was allowed that the one God that we worship allowed the people to believe in these other deities until he spoke and said, I am.
Mm. Yeah.
But the phrase that resounds throughout all of this story is "Let my people go,"
Mhm.
and that just resounds through history, through the time of Christ under the heel of the Romans, all the way up to now. That's what they're saying in Gaza. Let my people go.
Yeah.
If we
And in the southern border, let my people go. Just let them go.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I mean, so what we have is this cosmic story. I mean, he ends on page 72. Titles this whole section "The Cosmic Battle." That the whole story from Genesis to Revelation is a story of Exodus. It's a story of letting my people go. It's a story of moving from slavery into freedom, and that story, and that's what God is doing, is moving from chaos into order, which we sometimes think is opposite of freedom, but to be disentangled from the dark forces, right? Most of our great myths tell us that story as well.
Yeah, I mentioned that in that second paragraph of the 10th plague, setting us up for the Passover cosmic dimension.
Yeah.
And what you're right about, Avis, on that third paragraph, where it says Yahweh sets his sights not on the political power of Egypt, but on the gods that back it.
Yeah.
They accept that the Israelites assumed there were many gods. And you're right, that's the big part of it.
So I'm just imagining. I mean, because I think we're living this story today. I mean, I think we're always living this story.
Yes.
And I'm just imagining what, the kind of destruction that people were observing and living and feeling like, well, this has got to be the end, right? This this
Mhm.
got to be it.
Yeah.
And that I feel that often these days. This has got to be it. This is the story that's being told. This is the culmination. This is the end of all things. And knowing that God calls order out of chaos, that even if it is, I mean, even if it is, I have hope in that, in the God who calls us to God's self. And that, but in the midst of it, we also have this story of freedom brought to us by Jesus Christ, right? So, and And what do people who are free do?
Mhm.
They lay down their lives for the other. They love their enemies as themselves. So I'm going to stop. Jane and then Sharon, I think, wanted to say something. Jane,
Yeah, I was kind of fascinated by the thought of chaos, because chaos, I don't know, it's like life is on a chaos spectrum. We're somewhere on there all the time. Chaos does not, God steps into chaos and gives order, and then the world defaults back to chaos. Chaos
we do
isn't
it on our own. God is God and we are not. I mean, all of those things. Oh, yeah. Sharon, were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I've never thought of it as the whole story from Genesis to Revelation being making order out of chaos and bringing God's people from bondage to freedom. And yet, just like today, think of the Israelites who said, quit rocking the boat. You're making matters worse.
Mhm.
Why didn't you just leave us
alone?
Leave us alone. It's worse wandering in the wilderness than it was being slaves to
Yeah.
Egypt. We don't like this food, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, we're no different.
We are no different. We are
Yes.
such whiners. Jane sign.
I look at our lives today full of sin, and God is bringing order out of this crappy stuff we're living, that we call sin, and everybody is doing wrong. Not everybody, but the stuff we do. And I think God is correcting us, bringing us into order.
Peace.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing, but we have to live through it because we created the disorder.
Hello.
I saw something on Facebook this morning that was posted by a woman named Lisa Sharon Harper, who is an African American. I don't know if I'd go so far as to call her a theologian, but she's certainly someone who is active in looking at what God is calling us to do. I don't always agree with her, but sometimes I do. She posted a picture from that video of Gaza as a vacation spot
Mm.
and it was a picture of the golden statue of
Mm.
Trump.
Yep, I saw that.
And her heading was "Behold Nebuchadnezzar."
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. I found something. I found something.
One thing, Ann, the comparisons are vast, are they not? I mean, the golden calf. The comparisons are huge and vast, and
Well, and it only says that Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue.
yeah,
And there are lots of interpretations that say it was a golden statue of him.
No, yeah, so idol.
That's a pretty Jewish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always thought growing up when we heard the story of Daniel
yeah.
that bowing down to the golden statue meant bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So did I.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, Ann.
Oh, I was just looking on page 73. I hadn't realized the implication that, of course, I understood the water meant life to the Egyptians, it still does. But like you said, Avis, he was fighting against the Nile. They had a Nile deity, Hepti, which of course I hadn't heard of. and then the idea of fertility being depicted as a frog. So those were just two little kind of trivia things. I went, oh, but extremely the difference between water life and fertility.
Yeah. I mean, those plagues are all amazingly symbolic, of course.
Yes.
And meaning
Something that came to light for me was at the bottom of this page of 72. The language means something.
Yeah, just going to point that out. Yep.
That they're monotheistic, but they're
They're
monolastrous.
Yeah. Yeah.
That they have many gods, but they still bring one out of it.
So I think that's pivotal in our understanding, and I'm not quite sure. So I think that's what's really, really important for everything we've just talked about: God's agency in this, and God needing Yahweh, to show that Yahweh is the God. And that word monolatris, they believed in the existence of many gods, but only worshiped one of them. That little piece is never made clear, I think, to us New Testament people reading the Old Testament. And I mean, because I have always understood monotheism. And this changes that enough for me to be able to go back to these books and more fully understand what's going on here. I do want to ask Sharon about that. Is there any, I mean, it is one God above all gods. That's what being Jewish is.
Yes.
What are the other
but
gods? I haven't figured that out. Who are the other gods the Jews have?
The whole, no, we're not talking necessarily about the Jews. We're talking about the pantheon of gods.
Oh, okay.
And that's certainly what Enz is saying here makes perfect sense to me, especially if we hark back to like when Rebecca was chosen to be Isaac's wife, or when Rachel and Leah came and they left Laban's house. It says they took their gods with them. I don't remember ever learning that. I mean, it's not like when I was in Hebrew school, we sat down and read from cover to cover here. We read bits and pieces. I mean, I knew who Rebecca was. I knew who Jacob and Leah was. Broadly, I knew those stories.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Well, it's fascinating. Even, this last go around we read in this church that I'm helping out in, we read through the book of Ruth. And here I am seeing that, Ruth came from a land of many gods, and she was willing to accompany Naomi back to Galilee, where she was, Nazareth, where she said to her, I will believe in your God. I will leave all of my gods behind. So that was different than the ones who said, we'll just bring our gods with us.
Right. And even with the story of Ruth, we never learned that.
Yeah.
When she said, I'll follow your God, as though Ruth was just living in, I don't know, outer space.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because we'd repeat those words. They're repeated, at marriage ceremonies. What? I didn't hear it.
Yeah, never knew. Oh, go ahead, Ava.
The Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments, the first one.
Yeah.
Yes.
You shall have no other gods before me.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
Yep. Assuming there are other gods, which I never.
Right.
never
And N
got
says
that.
here on page 73, the last sentence in the second paragraph, This is also the first of the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me, as opposed to no other gods exist
Oh.
except me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That was
Oh,
revelatory to me.
Are we all picturing some kind of a statue that is a god? What about things even this machine we are currently using at this moment
I think
being
that
a
that's
god?
I think that's the forward interpretation of this, but the revelation of, I mean, because I could make that forward interpretation, no problem. But the revelation here that what it says is, you shall have no other gods before me, as opposed to no other gods exist except me. That very thing, Jane, is what makes this so difficult. It is the acknowledgement that there are principalities and powers
oh,
call our attention away from God. And that, I think, is the forward interpretation that you're suggesting, that we today, there is so much to call our attention away from God. And we can, and I have named those things idols, other gods that pull our attention away. It's
And I mean,
even stronger.
sorry, Avis,
What,
go ahead.
Avis and
Sharon.
then Sharon.
Oh, I think Sharon was actually first. I'll go after Sharon.
Okay, Sharon and then Avis.
Just that was, that's the first of the commandments.
Mhm.
And Moses comes down from Sinai with those commandments, and what's at the bottom?
Yeah.
A golden calf.
Yeah.
No wonder he got so pissed off.
Yeah. Yeah. And the denial that went with it.
Yeah.
It just appeared, you know?
Right.
I didn't do it.
Go ahead.
I learned somewhere or heard somewhere that monotheism came out of the Babylonian captivity, that the way people used to conquer countries was you would sort of go in and smash up their idols and make them observe your God. But then the Babylonians, the second Babylonian captivity or whatever, had a newer, more efficient method. They didn't smash up the deity. They just said, oh yeah, that's just another form of our deity. We've got the best image, but your image is okay. And as long as you pay us, protection money, you can keep your deity in your order. We don't have to send in there doesn't have to be vast bloodshed and smashing of idols. We can just more efficiently just make you bow down. And so, if you were living in the, right, it was like protection money. So then if you were living in the vast, Babylonian Empire and traveled far and wide through the Babylonian Empire, which to them was like, as big as the world gets, there was really only one deity with sometimes multiple names. And so then I think it was an easy step for the Israelites to say, there is only one God and Yahweh is his name. And, so when they came out of the Babylonian captivity, that was kind of their big statement. And that's when they became monotheistic.
I find it interesting, and thank you, Avis.
Sounds right.
I don't know if that's true. I just heard that somewhere.
It sounds like a good timeline, though.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, and yes, Sharon, I'm looking at the Bible. We both have, but the concept I never thought before. Gods before me implies other gods, which we have never, said. I never,
Me
well, I guess
either.
we did, they were so they had other gods, but they weren't
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah, it does. It implies other gods.
Mhm.
Which doesn't always get, it is right if you seriously.
And that acknowledgement of there having been other gods was never part of my upbringing, certainly. And I would bet probably not really yours either.
Not in such a way. I mean, I guess I always struggled, I think Jane Syme had pointed that out. I always struggled with that first commandment about, well, what are those? What would those other gods be? There are no other. I mean, God is God, right? What other gods are we talking about here? But that's, my modern experience, your modern experience. It's not the story that's contained in these books.
Well, if you read about other cultures, for instance, the Egyptians, they got a multitude of gods, but I never heard in the Hebrews or Israelites what other gods they had.
No, I never
don't
heard of
know.
that either.
Well, I think
Just to throw it, well, okay. Nothing.
That's because I'm picturing a statue like a golden calf or a whatever, But as I said before, we've got so many other gods like this thing we're talking on.
so. I think that I mean, I may be wrong here, but I think that the Hebrew people didn't have other gods. It was the battle of other cultural gods, right? It was in the Babylonian, all of those gods. It was in all these places where the Hebrew people sort of ended up going, exiling to, that there were other gods, and what this was about is don't be taken on those other gods. I
Well,
am your God.
What I've been reading, my background has always been that the other gods of like Egypt and so forth were the gods that this is speaking about. But
Yes.
as I'm reading this Exodus thing, it brings to mind, hey, what other gods?
Well, speaking to that, Jane, the concept that as they are in Egypt and whatever at Babylonian, but then later on when they're in getting to the promised land and God says, don't take wives from another place, from
Right.
another religion, they will bring their gods with them, and you will be messed up, whatever word you want,
Don't do that.
to the other, and that's where we end up with Israel and Judah falling apart.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is interesting because in this day and age, if you're talking about forward, then we have the other side that says there is no God at all. The complete atheist, we'll call it atheist, whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
So that you have, which you don't get in here.
Well, that's not this story. I wonder if we were reading a different story.
Yeah.
If that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the ancient literature that I know of, is always theistic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because
No, I'm talking 20th
Yeah.
century.
No.
Yeah,
Your question was, what have we always had God, right? And I just don't know that a story without God is recorded. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's good.
and perhaps that's because the existence of gods with an S on the end and a small g is a way to explain the natural world.
Yes.
Because there was no scientific background. Whereas today, people who don't believe in any God at all are actually, they look to scientific proof, or what they call scientific proof.
Scientific what?
Proof.
Which sometimes acts as a God.
Right. I mean, I always think of my uncle, who he was an electrical engineer, and he worked on a lot of those space kinds of things. Like stuff that was supposed to keep the US safe in times of nuclear attack and all those sorts of things. And I mean, he was a scientist, and yet he always said, nah, there's no conflict here.
Mhm.
There's a God.
Right, right. No, and there doesn't have to be conflict.
Yeah.
We've seen all sorts of well respected people who are fully capable of keeping those two things weaved together. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is so much fun. It's so fascinating to read this with Peter Enns and to read it with you. I just haven't, it's just been so much fun to do all this learning.
I've learned a lot there. Okay, book, where'd you go? My, some little god just kind of book and put it into outer space.
You got to tame those household gods. Ann.
Yeah.
I do. I'm like, what the heck? I know I went and got what the
No, we haven't talked at all yet, and Anne did allude a little bit to the actual plagues and the representations that they are. Do we have any more conversation that we want around the sort of the actual plagues and what we wonder
Oh, here it is.
they might
Before you go off too far, tonight is the planets in a line.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
right.
We
Right.
should feel some weirdness from all that.
Oh, I'm glad that I'm not teaching today.
Yeah, there you go. He
Somebody said,
has this wonderful chart on these two charts, I think 67 and 68
Mhm.
for me were really
Yeah, I like charts too. I'm with him.
informational. That was really kind of
Okay.
good to see that.
As he goes through the plagues and which god would be in charge of what was happening,
Yeah.
like
Ah.
the frogs and the Nile. It's interesting to me on page 74, he says, in the 9th plague, the sun is blotted out. It just so happens that the sun god Ra personally backed Pharaoh. And I mean, if I, which I mean doesn't mean anything really, but growing up, Amun Ra was always said to be like the chief god of Egypt. And here he is,
Mhm.
unable to get through.
the other chief god is, I read a historical fiction one, Amun-Kamen, where one of the pharaohs decided to do away with Ra and started the idea of a one god only. I think they killed him. I'm not sure, but the poor guy, he really thought he kind of had the right idea, but different name, Amun-Kamen, and that sort of was like, well, but yeah.
And I think just as important as that fascinating information is, the next paragraph is ultimately, I think, to be clear, I don't believe, and I presume you don't either, that there are gods that control various segments of nature. But the ancient Israelites lived in a world that most certainly did.
Rather
And
than
they
science.
were presented with all sorts of opportunities to worship these other gods, like everyone else did. That, I think, Jane Syme, that might answer your question about these other gods. I mean, they're whirling, the stories about these gods are whirling around, presented to the Hebrews, depending on where they were and who they were encountering. And what this is, there is a battle.
Well, that's understandable. Things rub off on you.
Yeah, yeah. which is why that statement of Ruth is so fascinating. I will leave my gods behind and I will be yours.
Mhm.
I will be worship your God, Naomi. Yeah.
I like his second to last paragraph there because it's kind of where we're at. We modern day readers get caught up focusing or obsessing over the historical accuracy of the stories of the plagues, but they're shaped by a world that accepted the reality of an active and populated divine God realm, which Paul mentions in a different way when he talks about principalities and powers.
Exactly.
Not other gods, but the concept that there is something else out there also. And then he says their mythic content would have spoken so loudly to the ancient people.
Yeah. And we to this day wonder about a theology that does define evil, and what does that mean in this compendium? Is Paul's concept of principalities and powers what we might call evil? And we don't really have much capacity, do we, to answer that question? Catherine and I have been going to a group on Wednesday mornings that is reading Brian McLaren's book, Life After Doom. And there's a fellow, I can't come up with David's definition of evil, but the fellow in this group quoted a writer who really had an amazing definition of evil that seems like it is operative in this day and age. I could actually say, yes, indeed, I see this evil acting today. And that's that, how does that work into our theology and who God is and who's fighting here? Right?
It's just spreading through our government.
Yeah.
One thing after the next.
Worldwide.
Either way,
Yeah.
we all have our own ideas.
And we believe in a God who's capable of creating order out of chaos, right?
And creating chaos in order to bring order.
To bring order, right? Is that true too? So where do we fit into that? And I mean, I guess that's where Catherine can attest. I had a little bit of a conversation with one of the fellows in our small group that didn't go well. What do you do? What do we do in this? What do we do in these times, right? It's not about a political party anymore. It's about how do we believe in hope, and what are we going to do to act on that, right? And I think that's the question. What do we do to act on this love that we believe is absolutely present?
There has to be something to rise up the way people rose up in the 60s.
Yeah.
And marched and mobilized against the war in Vietnam. And we have to do the same somehow.
Yeah.
So we are getting close to that time. Are we going to just do chapter 8 next time?
Yep, let's do chapter 8. I will be in the warm climes.
Well, do you want to
No problem with this next Friday. The next Friday, I'll let you know, because I'll have my whole group of people with me that next Friday. But it's coming up Friday. I'll be by myself, so it'll be just fine and dandy.
So we should expect next Friday.
Yeah. The Friday after that, you should just make all those professional religious come to Bible study.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Be fun.
Other ideas. That would be amazing. All right, we'll see you all.
Okay.
God bless you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Good luck with your
everyone.
move,
Safe
Jen.
travels, Kathy.
Thanks.
Good luck with your, feel better, Kathy, with your
Oh,
thumb.
yeah, it'll be fine.